Humanity was under attack by terrible creatures. Monsters, zombies, and demons had taken over everything, turning the world into a true apocalypse. Even so, there was still one hero standing, trying to fight one of the most powerful enemies. Despite his determination to the end, the warrior ended up falling. That was Aios, the most powerful swordsman in the Empire. He knew it would be difficult to face the Black Knight, a warrior who had come directly from hell, and even said that this outcome had already been expected. However, at that moment, the Black Knight's helmet broke, revealing his true face. For the first time in a long while, he could see the world with his own eyes. While this was happening, the one responsible for all that destruction finally declared that the cursed empire had been destroyed. He remembered an old saying, "The longer the wait, the sweeter the revenge." His plan had been created 1,000 years earlier and was now complete, filling him with immense happiness. This was the Arch-Lich Dorgo, the grand mastermind behind everything. Dorgo was speaking with Howard Adele Light, the Emperor of Helios, who demanded to know how he had dared to massacre all of his people. But Dorgo ignored the provocations and said they should proceed with the coronation. He bragged about unifying the entire continent for the first time in history, calling this union an empire. Dorgo then turned to his subjects and praised them. He said that they had all done well, including his demon kings, and ordered the Death Knight to bring the imperial crown. The Death Knight walked slowly, holding the crown as Dorgo's joy grew. He said that his loyal knight had played the most important role in the entire war and wondered how he could reward him. Moments later, he concluded that this was a stupid question, as the Death Knight was a slave with no right to honor or any reward greater than serving him. But suddenly, the Death Knight threw the crown into the air and shattered it with his blade, breaking it into several pieces. Shocked, Dorgo shielded himself with his magic, and the other demon kings rushed to defend him. Even so, with a single strike, the Death Knight killed them all. Dorgo could not believe that everyone had been defeated so quickly. In an attempt to reverse the situation, Dorgo revived all the dead on the battlefield, creating a massive army of zombies. However, the Death Knight ordered everyone to stop and surrender. The zombies were annihilated instantly. Dorgo was terrified to realize that he had created a monster as powerful as a god. He tried to reason with him, saying he understood the Death Knight's fury, as he had once felt that way too. He claimed that even if he were defeated now, he could transfer his consciousness to another body and eventually regain control. As he spoke, he remembered that he had completely erased the Death Knight's consciousness, believing he would never be able to rebel. But the Death Knight explained that in fact, he had never disappeared. He had remained trapped inside his own body, fully aware of everything, just waiting for an opportunity to act. Throughout all those years, he had thought only of ways to kill Arch-Lich Dorgo. Now, he was ready to use a sword technique so powerful it could even cut through the enemy's soul. Dorgo believed such a technique to be impossible, but before he could react, he was struck. For a moment, he thought he was intact, but then he began expelling his demonic energy as if vomiting out his very soul. Unable to contain the destruction, Dorgo exploded and died definitively. His skull fell to the ground, and the Death Knight crushed it, sending him back to hell. Emperor Howard watched everything without understanding what was happening. Shortly afterward, the Death Knight fell to his knees, saying to himself that it was finally over. However, he knew there was still one more thing to do. He wanted to apologize to his family, knowing he could only see them again in death, so he decided to end his miserable life. Later, the Death Knight began to wake up, hearing a familiar voice. It was Louise speaking to him affectionately. He found it strange to think he could at least see her before going straight to hell. However, he was surprised to see how young she looked. She teased that it was flattering and asked if he was trying to be polite before their father found out what he had done. Louise said he could count on his older sister's help, but mentioned that it would soon start raining and suggested he go inside. Then she ran back home. Meanwhile, Damien, now finding himself in that place, looked around confused. He clearly remembered destroying that mansion with his own hands. He began to wonder if he was in a dream or if everything else had been the nightmare. He then picked up a stick from the ground, thinking it would do. He used his sword technique against a rock. When the strike landed, the rock shattered completely, even with just a stick. Damien was shocked by the result. As the rain began to fall, he realized this was not a dream. He had truly returned to the past. It was then that he remembered his greatest talent, disgracing his own family's honor. He recalled his father's harsh words, calling him crazy for starting bar fights while drunk. He remembered his father asking if he intended to stain the family's honor even more, something he had apparently done his entire life. He was infamous as the worst possible example for the future of the Haxon family. He also remembered his mother asking why he had taken all the money meant for the family's lands. Damien had another equally destructive talent, losing all of the family's properties. Because of his actions, he was exiled. Even so, Louise, his older sister, had given him some money before he left, helping him despite all the harm he had caused. That day, he had run away, finally understanding what guilt and shame meant. Now he was back in the past, before his death. He remembered the promise he made to himself that he needed to apologize to his family no matter what. Maybe that return was a divine miracle. He thought he might have received this second chance thanks to the technique he had mastered, Shockwave, capable of amplifying the impact of any strike many times over. He had learned this deadly technique after defeating a knight known as the Castle Wall Breaker. While reflecting, someone called him Young Master. He recognized the voice of the family servant and tried to remember his name, asking if it was Victor. The servant confirmed and explained that Louise had asked him to fetch him, but he had not returned yet. Victor also mentioned that the patriarch was absolutely furious with him. Damien then asked what he had done this time. Victor replied in surprise, questioning whether he really didn't remember. When he returned home, his father was already calling him a disgrace. This happened in the Viscounty of Haxon. His father even tried to stab him in the throat with a sword, shouting that he had lost his mind for causing a huge drunken mess at a bar before being kicked out. His mother and sister tried to hold the patriarch back as he yelled, asking how long Damien would go on destroying the family's honor. At that moment, Damien realized he had truly returned to that exact point in time. He saw Paul Osborne Haxon, his father, Marilda Haxon, his mother, and Louise Haxon, his sister. He missed them so much that he started to cry. The three noticed his tears and asked if he was crying, saying their father must have gone too far. Paul demanded to know what excuses he had this time, but Damien, unlike in the past, responded that he had none. His father was confused and insisted, asking if he wasn't going to defend himself with some pathetic excuse like always. Damien admitted that he was fully aware of everything. He acknowledged that he had tarnished the honor of the Viscounty of Haxon and declared that it was entirely his fault, leaving no room for excuses. Paul said fine, but warned that he wouldn't let it go without consequences this time. Damien replied that he was ready to accept that. He promised that he would work to correct all the mistakes he had made. He said that if he failed to do so, he would accept any punishment his father deemed fair. The other three, Paul, Marilda, and Louise, were skeptical. They didn't quite understand the sudden change in his behavior. Paul even asked if he had hit his head at the bar to be talking like that. Later, Damien was with Victor in the merchant city of Landwalk. The servant seemed very nervous and asked if Damien really wanted to go there, saying there were rumors that the local syndicate supported some dangerous men. Victor was worried about what could happen. Damien simply replied that if Victor was so scared, he could return to the estate, but Victor refused, saying he couldn't abandon the young master like that. Even though he was anxious, he insisted on staying by his side. Damien, for his part, tried to reassure him, saying he only wanted to sincerely apologize to the bar owner and pay for everything he had broken last time. Victor thought that if it actually worked, it would be great, but he had doubts whether things would really go well. As they walked through the streets, Damien reflected on how he had managed to return to the past. He wondered if this might be a second chance given by God. This time, he didn't want to hurt his family. He wanted to bury once and for all that cursed talent for destroying everyone around him. When they reached the bar, the guards immediately recognized him. They were not happy to see him. They had already warned that if he ever showed up again, they would not go easy on him. Damien remembered them even after all this time. Their faces were familiar to him. He explained that he only wanted to apologize to the owner for what he had done. One of the guards laughed mockingly, while another asked if he really meant to apologize. They said they could pass the message to the boss, but it was certainly unexpected to hear that. They also remarked that he was the eldest son of a declining noble family, but that he was doing a little better than expected. One of the guards mentioned he had heard that Damien's sister was very pretty, and another asked if there was anything good in that family at all. In a provoking tone, they said they would accept his apology if he introduced them to his sister. That was when Damien lost his patience. He snatched the knife from one of the guards with lightning speed. He was frustrated to realize that he couldn't just go there, apologize, and return home in peace. Everyone seemed to want to complicate things. With a swift and precise movement, he raised the knife and severed the guard's hand, who didn't even realize what had happened until he collapsed to the ground, screaming in pain. Damien warned them that if they wanted to see him in action so badly, he would show them what the eldest son of the Viscounty of Haxon was capable of. Meanwhile, Victor, terrified in the alley, thought he had been wrong to believe Damien would do things the right way this time. Soon, more people began to gather, curious about the commotion. One of the older guards said he didn't want to see any of that, while another threatened Damien. saying no one went unpunished after challenging the Black Snake. That was when Damien remembered who those men were. The Black Snake was a criminal organization that had been growing rapidly in Landwalk, gaining power and influence. He recalled that this bar was the exact place he had been kicked out of in the past after complaining about the overpriced, terrible food. It was there that they had beaten him in front of everyone to set an example. Upon remembering this, he concluded that he was the one who should be receiving an apology, not the other way around. As he reflected, one of the guards asked why he was smiling. He warned that he wouldn't go easy on him just because he was a noble. As the guard lunged to attack, Damien simply put his foot out, tripping him and sending him face first into the ground. He told himself that, to be honest, he should kill them right there. But he decided to resist the temptation for the sake of his family. So he stabbed the guard in the leg to keep him from getting up, but left him alive. Other individuals appeared, looking like mercenaries, asking who the hell that kid was. The man who seemed to be their leader asked if he belonged to another organization. Damien replied no, saying he only wanted to apologize. But at that moment, he realized once again that he was the one who deserved an apology. Still, he stuck to his goal of speaking to the owner and politely asked if that man could take him to him. The blue-eyed man responded that he had no idea what Damien was talking about and said there was nothing to discuss. He ordered them to just drag him out by force. 3 guards rushed at once, but Damien, faster than an arrow, defeated them with just a few knife strikes. The leader was stunned to see the 3 lying on the ground, knocked out. Damien was breathing heavily, saying to himself that he was tired of doing this and admitting he was out of shape. He asked if the blue-eyed man wanted to continue, but the man quickly gave up, saying he was sorry and that he would arrange the proper apology. Even so, Damien did not trust him and chased him like a dog after its prey. Soon after, everyone in the bar was shocked to see the guard, who had seemed so confident before, being dragged with a knife pressed to his neck. Damien realized he might have gone too far and thought that was why they should have listened to him from the start when he was still calm and polite. He wiped the blood from his face with a cold stare, which scared everyone in the bar, making them run outside fearing for their lives. Feeling there was no one left to stop him, he prepared to leave without further obstacles. However, the bar owner, Anderson Hong, finally appeared. He watched Damien with suspicion and asked about the guards. Damien replied coldly that he had already dealt with them. Anderson was surprised to realize that this boy had defeated members of the group known as the Black Snake. He wondered who he really was and why he was disrupting his business. Damien introduced himself as a member of the Haxon family from the Viscounty, explaining that he was not there to cause trouble. In fact, he wanted an apology from Anderson himself. He told him that he had complained about the absurdly high prices at the bar, which had earned him a beating and the humiliation of being thrown out. After that, he became known in the city as a drunk who caused problems, seriously harming his family's reputation and assets. Anderson showed disdain, saying he did not care about honor and that the Haxon Viscounty had none. He mocked the idea of apologizing to Damien and demanded payment for the damages. Damien then realized he had no intention of resolving things peacefully. Determined to force an outcome, he used a chair and a table for momentum and, with a quick leap, closed in on Anderson to attack him. But before the blow landed, another person appeared and intercepted the attack. This new figure radiated powerful energy. Anderson looked relieved and commented that Ted had arrived just in time. Even Damien was surprised by the strength of this opponent, knowing that someone with that level of power would not work in a regular bar. It was explained that knights followed a path of martial arts throughout their lives and were ranked according to their skill. There were recruits, apprentice knights, and official knights. Officials were so strong they could use their aura to cut mountains, being seen as almost transcendent beings. Anderson, excited, explained that Ted was an apprentice knight, very close to the Black Snake boss, assuring that Damien was dead. Damien reflected that this explained the aura he had felt, though he wondered how he had sensed it if Ted had not even fully materialized it. He guessed Ted might be a reject, someone who had failed to become an official knight and ended up involved in crime. Anderson then asked how much it would cost for Ted to take care of Damien, but Ted ignored the price for now and showed hatred, saying he would first rip out the noble's mouth. Ted's first attacks were easily dodged by Damien, who noted his opponent's skill despite the still somewhat uncoordinated movements. Even so, he recognized that his current body was near its limit, since he needed to strengthen his energy to fight better. Increasingly irritated, Ted decided to use a secret technique. Damien noticed this and focused, remembering a specific technique he could use in response. He recalled a terrible enemy, who in the past had caused problems for Dorgo, the legendary assassin known as the Master of the Deathblade or Phantom Assassin, who killed not only demons, but humans for fun. In that memory, the Phantom Assassin threatened him, telling him to leave if he wanted to live. But Damien, as a Death Knight, did not back down. The assassin promised to make him another of his victims, saying he would show him his secret technique. He explained that the human body is made mostly of water, and upon reaching a certain level of mastery, it was possible to use this technique to cut through the body easily even with a wooden sword. He then sliced the knight in half with the death blade. However, even after being split, the knight regenerated in a bizarre way, with the flesh rearranging itself until he stood up again. This happened because he was no longer a living human, but rather an undead. After learning the technique from his opponent, the Death Knight watched the Phantom Assassin carefully, and with a precise move defeated him using the enemy's own technique without even needing a sword, just his hands. The Phantom Assassin, stunned, could not understand how Damien had learned his secret so quickly. In the memory, Damien thought it had always been like that. Enemies never believed in their own death. Since becoming the Death Knight, he had gained a rare ability that allowed him to absorb the techniques of those he defeated. Back in the present, Ted was also in shock. He had been hit by his own technique and was trying to understand how that was possible. Anderson, the bar owner, panicked when he realized what was happening. Sweating cold, he fell to his knees, banged his head on the floor, and begged for forgiveness, apologizing for the dishonor he had caused Damien's family. The scene was chaotic. One of the guards had lost a hand, the other a foot. To try to calm things down, Anderson offered a large sum of money as compensation. Damien thought that all he had wanted was a simple apology, but admitted to himself that the extra payment was not bad at all. Even so, he said it still was not enough, but that he would let it go this time. He turned to Victor, asking him to quickly pack all the money and valuables. Victor obeyed but remained stunned by everything he had seen. He wondered where Damien had learned such impressive skills. When they finally left the bar, Anderson and the guards, even injured, wished them a good trip back. Victor commented, wide-eyed, that he had never seen so much money together. But inside, Anderson was swearing he would find a way to get it all back, planning to turn to the Black Snake boss. Before they got too far, Damien returned and cut off Anderson's ear as a final punishment, saying he had almost forgotten the punishment he deserved. He threatened that Anderson could talk to the Black Snake boss if he wanted, but if he dared to touch his family, he would not live to see the next day. Anderson was terrified, realizing he would not get rid of that problem so easily. Damien reflected in silence. He knew that this revenge would not erase his past sins, but in this new life he would no longer allow himself to shame his family. He turned to Victor and said it was time to go home. Sure, they had great news to share. Meanwhile, in another region, in the Marquisate of Lionbloom, a man looked at himself in the mirror and spoke to his brother about an old saying that pain always follows love. The brother, confused, asked why he was saying that, wanting to know if he planned to pick a fight with someone. The man replied that on the contrary, he was thinking about finding a new love. The next morning in the Haxon Viscounty, Damien woke up satisfied. He commented that it had been a long time since he had had such a good night's sleep. Victor, on the other hand, confessed that he had not managed to close his eyes because he kept reliving the brutal scenes from the previous day, with arms and legs flying. Damien admitted that things had not gone exactly as planned, but they ended up with a good reward. More importantly, he knew that the rumors about what happened would spread quickly, and that this would make people take the Viscount's family more seriously. He even hoped to improve a little his own reputation as a troublemaking son. Victor had not thought of that before, but admitted that Damien was aware of who he was and the past he carried. He praised that, in the end, everything had worked out, but expressed concern about the Black Snake organization. He knew they were not just common thugs, since they had even hired an apprentice knight. Damien, however, replied that it did not matter how bold they were. They would never risk attacking a noble family directly. Even if they tried, he would find a way to deal with them. Victor, impressed, acknowledged that Damien's sword techniques were much more refined than he had imagined. Curious, he asked where he had learned them. Damien simply replied that he trained from time to time. Suddenly, Paul appeared furious, demanding to know where Damien had been all day and asking if he had not gotten into more trouble. Damien calmly replied that he had already taken care of everything and asked Victor to show the reward they had brought. Victor then opened the bag full of money. Paul and Marilda were dazzled by the shine of the coins. Marilda even fainted in surprise. Damien, smiling, explained that he had gone to the bar just to apologize, but the math was wrong, so the bar owner gave him that as an apology. Paul asked if it was true and if he could trust him. Marilda, half passed out, commented that it probably was, since she did not see where Damien could have gotten so much money otherwise. Damien looked at Victor, waiting for support. Victor sighed and confirmed the story, even though he found it all absurd. In the end, he thought to himself that young Master Damien really was a compulsive liar. Later, Damien was running through the mountains. He thought that even though he had not run for that long, he was already out of breath. He recognized that his body was weak and slow and that he had a lot of work ahead, but in that condition, he would get nowhere. His only luck was having gotten a special vial that Anderson had given him. It was a tonic produced by an alchemy academy, known for greatly boosting vital energy. Damien remembered asking Anderson what exactly this alchemy academy was, and he had explained that it was a group of alchemists specialized in creating tonics as valuable as precious stones. When he drank the tonic, Damien felt the effect almost immediately. His body felt much stronger and full of energy. He concluded that the mixture was really potent. To reach the level he had in his past life, he knew he needed much more energy and vitality. It was not just about growing stronger out of pride. Damien carried with him the memory of a dark future. In a few years, Dorgo would raise an army of the undead and try to conquer the world once more. He promised himself that this time he would gather enough strength to kill him before that happened, and thus protect his family's happiness. Meanwhile, in the suburbs of Landwalk, in the Black Snake hideout, the atmosphere was tense. The organization's boss, Cedric Walker, commented that it was a pity because Ted had been his best hire, but now was useless. He ordered the guards to get rid of him, saying they could dump him anywhere since they had enough money to buy whoever they wanted. But Ted got up with difficulty and, even injured, said it would not end like that. Cedric was surprised to see he still had the strength to stand and commented that if he could fight again, he would hire him back. However, before Ted could react, he was restrained by black magic that bound his arms and legs. A dark mage who was there asked the boss if Ted was the first target of the contract. Cedric confirmed, saying it would be a good chance to test his skills. The dark mage then summoned demonic creatures made of pure darkness, which completely surrounded Ted and devoured him. In the end, only a foot was left. Cedric found the scene disgusting and asked the mage to be cleaner next time. The dark mage understood the criticism and wanted to know the next target. Cedric explained that was exactly why he had been hired. Someone had hurt the organization's reputation, a noble. He admitted dealing with him would be more complicated, but the instruction was clear. Cause as much damage as possible. He had already paid the mage in advance and told him to leave the rest to him. Sure, it would be handled easily. Meanwhile, in the Vi County, Damien continued training with determination. He was lifting much more weight than before and realized the tonic's effect had been excellent, boosting his vitality in just a few days. Still, he found it strange that nothing had happened since the bar incident. He was sure the Black Snake would come after him. At one moment, he noticed someone hiding in the bushes and thought it was a Black Snake spy. When he grabbed the person by the neck, he realized it was his own brother Abel. Abel complained that Damien was stronger than before and had almost strangled him. Damien remembered that in his past life, he had actually lost his brother and regretted the gesture. He offered his hand to help him up, saying he did not want to hurt him, but Abel refused the help, explaining he was not there to hear apologies. He said he had heard that Damien had gone to the tavern to get an apology, but that, in reality, there had been a violent fight with many injuries. Damien admitted it was true, and that he himself had done it. Abel did not believe it, saying Damien could fool the whole family but not him, and asked him not to cause any more trouble, reminding him that everyone had already cleaned up plenty of his messes in the past. Even so, Damien patted his brother's head. He thought about how Abel had always been direct and protective, the one who cared most about the family. He promised him that he would not cause any more trouble. At that moment, Victor appeared with a serious expression, saying he had an urgent message. Damien went immediately to the drawing room, and when he got there, he found a man sitting calmly, drinking tea and eating cake. He was not the most pleasant of guests. This man said Damien had arrived just in time, commented about what had happened earlier, and apologized for showing up so suddenly, explaining that it was his own father who had found out everything and left him no choice. Damien did not remember the details very well, but had the uncomfortable feeling that he had gotten involved with that guy before. He was Erwin Lionbloom, who, with a smile, asked if he remembered what had happened at the last social gathering. Erwin was clearly provoking Damien and apologized only to pretend goodwill, even though he had done it on purpose. Talking behind Damien's back was not enough for him. Now he also wanted to play innocent. Erwin even claimed that Damien had been drunk and had never said such things, but he would move closer to whisper provocations, asking what Damien would do to convince others, since no one would believe him. Damien remembered that back then he should have resisted the provocations but could not. He ended up punching Erwin in the face, which Erwin had actually expected and provoked him to achieve. Damien thought it was strange for an apprentice knight to take a punch like that, but realized Erwin's plan had always been to ruin his reputation. To make things worse, Erwin called it an embarrassing story, but took the opportunity to declare that he had admired Lady Louise for a long time and asked Paul for permission to marry her. Everyone was shocked by this. Damien realized he was doing the same thing he had done in the other life, using threats against the family to get what he wanted. Erwin said this marriage could settle the disrespect Damien had shown his family, leaving the incident behind. But Paul could not accept that because Louise was already in a relationship and engaged. Erwin insisted, questioning how they would pay for the insult he had suffered and whether the House of Viscount Haxon really had the strength to stand up to his family. He demanded a choice, threatening consequences. Paul thought about the influence of the Lionbloom family, one of the most powerful in the kingdom, but he did not want to hand over his daughter to people like them. At that moment, Louise appeared saying she accepted the proposal. Paul did not understand and tried to question her, while Abel insisted on finding another solution. Damien felt like he was betraying his family again, but Louise said it was fine and that she could go go with Erwin. He realized that once again it was happening because of him. Erwin, satisfied, believed he had won and praised Louise's intelligence, explaining that he would send someone to fetch her formally to discuss the details. However, Damien stepped in front of him to block his way. Erwin mocked him, saying they were now brothers-in-law. But Damien was determined not to let him ruin his sister's life. Full of rage, he punched Erwin so hard he sent him flying, coughing up blood. He thought he had endured this bastard too long for his sister and his family, but he could not watch everything fall apart again. In his mind, Damien remembered how everything had ended in his past life. It had been a long time since he had last seen Louise, and he had been excited to see her again. But when he arrived, he found a horrible scene. Erwin pulling her hair, hitting her and yelling, accusing her of acting that way after he had brought her insect family into his home. He said he would train her properly and began beating her brutally. Damien had not been able to do anything back then and blamed himself deeply, believing she had suffered because of him. That was why now he did not intend to let anything repeat. When the Lionbloom family guards showed up to question him about attacking the young master, Erwin provoked him, asking if he wanted to die right there. Erwin even drew his sword, but the guards tried to intervene to calm things down. However, he shoved them aside violently, saying he wanted to settle it personally. Louise panicked when she saw that Damien might die and begged them to stop. Damien, however, was calm. He thought he would not let his family sacrifice themselves for him anymore. So he firmly challenged Erwin to a duel with swords, where the winner would decide the other's fate. Erwin complained that this gave him no advantage, since Louise had already accepted his proposal. Damien asked if Erwin was trying to change the subject out of fear of losing. Erwin, in turn, thought Damien was being too arrogant, just because he had managed to land one lucky punch, and now thought he was strong. Even so, he had no reason to refuse a duel, and accepted without hesitation. Later that same day, everyone was gathered for the duel. Marilda asked if it would not be better to stop it before it was too late, but Paul said that if his son was so confident, he probably had a plan. Even so, he admitted there was not much they could do. Abel disagreed with his father, saying they could not count on miracles. To him, Erwin Lionbloom was already at the level of a knight, and Damien had no chance of winning. When they approached to begin, Erwin asked how Damien planned to fight without a sword. Damien replied not to worry and showed the weapon he brought, a fork. His family was disappointed, and Louise almost had a panic attack. Erwin began laughing, saying Damien must have gone crazy with fear, and promised to go easy on him so as not to kill him. The duel began, and on the first movies Damien managed to dodge. Even so, Erwin used his technique known as Lion's Roar Sword, creating an impact so strong it kicked up smoke on the field. Despite this, Damien dodged all the fast and numerous attacks, remaining completely unscathed. Even Erwin's guards were surprised, unable to understand how he could move so well in just a few seconds. Damien thought it had been good to have trained recently, but the truth was that he already knew the Lionbloom techniques very well from long ago. Before his regression, he had fought Michael Lionbloom in a battle to the death, and now he realized that Erwin was far below his brother's level. Even more irritated by the constant dodges, Erwin increased his aggression, using his aura to make Damien's movements even harder. Still, Damien remained calm. He concluded that the Sword Saint's technique would be the best response. Then, even using only a fork, he managed to block Erwin's sword and, with a simple and precise move, disarmed him. He used the so-called secret technique of 100,000 currents to disarm his opponent. Then he advanced with the fork and pressed the tip directly to Erwin's neck. Everyone was shocked, thinking he had killed him right there. But Damien had only lightly scratched his neck. He reflected that, considering what Erwin had done in his past life, killing him more than 12 times would still not be enough to get revenge. Even so, he decided to hold back this time for the sake of his family. Damien then declared that it was settled, asking if Erwin had any complaints or if he intended to challenge him again. He warned that, as promised, Erwin should leave and never set foot in his family's house again. Later, during dinner, everyone was silent. Damien thanked them for the meal and said he would go to bed early since he would need to train the next day. When he left, the atmosphere remained heavy. Marilda asked Paul if he was not going to talk to Damien, or at least ask what had happened in the duel. Abel was in shock, barely believing what he had seen. He remembered thinking of his brother as useless, cursed, and clumsy for everything. But now he realized Damien was a completely different person. He had defeated Erwin Lionbloom, practically a knight, using only a fork. Marilda commented that Abel really seemed impressed, but Paul said that was enough. They would simply pretend nothing had happened, because when the time was right, Damien himself would tell them everything. Even so, Paul was dying of curiosity, but felt he had to hold back out of respect for his son, who now seemed much more frightening than before. The next morning, Damien was getting ready for training. He tied 10-kilo sandbags to each leg to make his movements harder. At that moment, Louise appeared to talk to him him, happy to find him before he left. She wanted to discuss what had happened the day before. Damien felt he should apologize, so he lowered his head, saying he had acted very irresponsibly and put her in a difficult situation. He admitted he should have apologized before and promised it would not happen again. But Louise explained that was not why she had come to see him. In fact, she wanted to thank him. She admitted she had been very scared and only said she would go with Erwin to avoid putting everyone at risk. Despite that, Damien had protected her, which made her feel embarrassed, but at the same time very happy and grateful. Damien replied that he should be the one thanking her since he always felt grateful for everything his sister did for him. As they had nothing else to discuss, he prepared to leave for training, but Louise called him back to give him something. It was a sword their father had given her to pass on to her brother. Damien was surprised to realize he was really receiving a sword from his father. Louise just smiled, saying their father was not very good at expressing his feelings. Even though he did not show it well, Paul was proud of what his son had done, and had never stopped loving him for even a second. Still, he had said something about the duel, and Louise, imitating their father, said he could barely believe his son had used a fork in a fight. Damien found that scary because he could see his father's expression reflected in his sister's face. He then drew the sword he had received, noticing that it was sharp and beautiful, and sincerely thanked his father for it. While doing so, he ended up sneezing. That night, the Haxon estate was invaded by a shadow made of dark magic. It swallowed the guards easily and moved through the corridors while everyone slept. The dark mage walked unnoticed until he reached Louise's room, watching her and saying to himself that she was really beautiful. He had come on behalf of the Black Snake, but thought he had found something even better than he expected. At that moment, Damien appeared, asking what he thought he was doing there. He had felt a strange presence and came to check, confirming there was indeed a very suspicious man in his house. The dark mage was surprised because he had used magic to make everyone sleep, and did not understand how Damien had not been affected or noticed him approaching. Realizing he had been discovered, the mage tried to attack Damien, who managed to dodge easily. The intruder asked who he was, but Damien replied that the one who should be giving explanations was him since he was inside the Haxon house. When the mage asked if he was Damien Haxon, he confirmed and said they had better introduce themselves quickly because they would be having a long conversation from now on. Outside, the guards began hearing the noise coming from the room. The dark mage realized that the loud crash had woken part of the house and muttered that it would be very troublesome if more people showed up. With no choice, he turned back into shadow and escaped through the window. Damien wondered if he had lost his trail, but noticed the intruder had left traces of dark magic behind during the escape. When he went to the stables, he found the workers in shock, panicking when they saw that the most expensive horse on the property was dead. They were wondering how they would tell the Baron and said they were doomed. Damien startled them by appearing suddenly and asked them to calm down. He said he did not blame them for the horse's death, but needed them to leave for a while. He focused and examined the traces of dark magic that remained. That was how he found the dead horse, and concluded without doubt that the chaotic and evil aura was the result of dark magic. He thought that his family still had not realized anything and considered it better that way so they would not worry unnecessarily. Following the tracks, he reached a cave. Inside it, the dark mage was very pleased, saying to himself that the fool from the Black Snake had brought him everything he needed without even completing the mission. He commented that he had only wanted ingredients for a curse, but ended up with a huge stock. Even so, he complained about getting old and having to take such cheap jobs, saying he had no choice because the cult people were hunting him. At that moment, Damien interrupted, saying it was pathetic and that for that reason the mage would not live much longer. The dark mage recognized Damien and asked if he was really the heir of the Haxon house, wanting to know how he had been found. Damien replied that he had just followed his disgusting stench all the way there. The mage remarked that he had heard Damien had picked a fight with the Black Snake and realized he wasn't just a useless noble causing trouble in town. Damien said he was just keeping his guard up, asking if the mage had been hired by the Black Snake. The mage confirmed it, saying his task was to hurt him and his family as much as possible. Damien found that pathetic, saying that of all the jobs the mage could have taken, he chose this one, and that was why he would die now. The dark mage replied that Damien was interesting and that simply torturing him wouldn't be enough. Damien warned that it would be pretty hard to manage, explaining he had taken a vow in this life not to kill anyone who didn't need to die, but he would make an exception for dark mages like him. The mage was surprised by his attitude and said Damien was no pushover, but still wouldn't be able to escape. Damien, however, dodged all the spells thrown at him with ease. With a single single blow, he cut the dark mage in half. Of course, that wasn't the end. The mage's body turned into shadow and began regenerating. Damien noticed he was quite skilled for someone who accepted such cheap jobs. The dark mage laughed, saying attacks like that wouldn't work. Damien then warned that in that case he would cut him until he turned to dust. Without hesitation, he stabbed the shadow over and over, slicing it completely apart. The dark mage praised him, saying it wasn't bad at all and that it explained Damien's confident attitude. But he warned that the moment Damien had entered that cave, he had already become a dead man. He then summoned several demons against him, using powerful cult enchantments. Damien realized that could actually be dangerous. The dark mage said he would die at the hands of Yulin, his commander, who promised to disintegrate and devour every inch of his body with shadows. The next moment, Damien was completely trapped inside a cocoon of shadowy webs. Yulin thought he was just another arrogant fool who had provoked his own death. He figured the mission was basically complete now that Damien was eliminated, and that he could deal with his sister next. But Damien, analyzing the situation, recognized it as a corrosion curse and simply dissolved the cocoon with ease, emerging completely unharmed. Yulin was surprised and wondered how he knew so much about dark magic. Damien didn't explain much, only saying it was none of his business. Internally, he noticed that Yulin was starting to panic. He himself was a little surprised to feel that his authority was still active. He remembered well the time when Dorgo was still alive. Authority was a power granted by the gods. He recalled that Dorgo had created for him a powerful body, imbued with the best dark magic spells, yet was still dissatisfied with the result. Dorgo wanted the ultimate sword, the embodiment of evil, and to achieve that he used a ritual that directly transferred that power to Damien, turning him into an absolute weapon. At the time, Damien felt horrible pain, but was rewarded with the god's authority. He concluded that this was the authority of greed he had obtained in his previous life. He had imagined it disappeared when he was reborn, but now realized it was still with him. While dodging another attack from Yulin, Damien thought about how he had survived so far. He said everyone had an ace up their sleeve. He also reflected on the name Yulin, remembering that it wasn't his real name, but just the title of a commander in an organization specialized in assassination using dark magic. No wonder he was so skilled. The dark mage admitted that Damien's ace up his sleeve had been impressive, and commented that he would need to use something he had been saving for later. From the bracelet he wore, an enormous amount of dark mana poured out, almost transforming into another creature. Damien felt the dense mana and recognized that the bracelet was an artifact for storing power. Yulin summoned all that shadowy energy, saying he didn't know how Damien had broken his magic before, but that this time he wouldn't be able to resist. He then unleashed the flames of hell directly at him, believing it would be the end. However, Damien remained practically untouched, the flames just swirling around him. He explained that the authority of greed not only blocked dark magic, but also absorbed it. Yulin was shocked, asking how he could have a divine authority. Damien only said it was none of his business, suggesting he think of it as him having better equipment. Even so, Damien admitted to himself that it was disgusting. He was using a power he himself hated, but he had no choice. He needed to use the Death Knight's techniques to survive. He then summoned his shadowy aura. The dark mage was completely stunned to see that he also had an aura. Next, Damien used his ultimate ability, the soul-cleaving rupture blade, capable of cutting both the enemy's physical body and soul. When the attack struck the mage, it destroyed the cave walls, making everything collapse around them. Damien then said that if the mage wanted to say something before dying, he had better hurry because it would make everything less painful. He wanted to know where the Black Snake's hideout was. The next morning in the commercial district of Landwalk, Victor asked why exactly they were there this time and why Damien had come back. Damien told his loyal servant that if he wanted to come along, he'd have to do so in silence. Victor remarked that Damien seemed calm, but that the book he was reading was creepy. He asked why he was reading something so dark. Damien replied that it was a book of dark magic he had recently acquired by killing that mage. Victor was shocked, saying even someone as ignorant as him knew how dangerous it was to have a book of dark magic. As they spoke, he noticed a horrible smell and tried to figure out where it was coming from, only to realize they had already arrived in town. Damien, holding a stinking bag, asked Victor to carry it for a bit. Victor asked what exactly it was. Damien explained bluntly that it was a human head. Victor, incredulous, told him to cut it out with that kind of joke, saying it wasn't funny at all. When Victor opened the bag, he was shocked to see it really was a head. Damien told him to calm down because everyone was watching. Victor, pale, asked who that person was. Damien replied that he would explain later, but first needed Victor to deliver that head to the address he would give him. He assured him that by doing so, they wouldn't have any more problems with it in the future. Victor, completely stunned, could only wonder how any of that was possible. possible. Later, Damien finally found the Black Snake's hideout. He found it amusing how those gangsters called it a hideout, even though it was right in the middle of the city. He thought they were idiots for believing no one would notice. When he arrived, he calmly introduced himself as Damien Haxon of the Viscounty of Haxon. Some guards mocked him, saying he was crazy to give his name so openly. But another one commented that this was the guy the boss had talked about. Damien realized they already knew who he was and explained he had business with the Black Snake's boss, asking them to step aside. One of the guards pretended to cooperate, telling him to go ahead. Damien thought to himself that he was surprisingly agreeable, but immediately afterward the other guard fired a flare into the air. In seconds, he was surrounded by reinforcements, with the guards taunting him and saying he was screwed now. Damien simply warned them they would regret that decision. Meanwhile, in Landwalk, Governor Sebastian Baker was in his mansion, surrounded by women and expensive food. He praised Cedric, saying thanks to him he could live that luxurious life. Nearby, Landwalk's chief knight, Robert, was drinking non-stop. Cedric said it was an honor to be there in the ruler's house, even with him being so busy. Sebastian mentioned he wanted to discuss business with Cedric and said it was fine if the Black Snake took on certain contracts in the city. Cedric, surprised, asked if he was serious. Sebastian confirmed confidently, saying the Black Snake was changing Landwalk for the better. Cedric thanked him but showed some concern about possible reactions from other rulers. Sebastian said he could easily suppress any opposition using his authority. Robert commented that he felt bad about not being able to repay so much favor, but Cedric reassured him, saying maintaining public order in Landwalk was enough. Robert, satisfied, asked for more drinks, and Cedric thanked them both, though internally he was thinking their heads would roll soon. He planned to take over the entire city with the Black Snake and make everyone kneel before him. While they were celebrating, one of Cedric's subordinates rushed in with an urgent message. Cedric stepped away to hear it. When he heard the contents, he repeated the name angrily, Damien Haxon. He wondered if the dark mage he had sent had failed. He thought it was good he had ordered his men to be ready. He said he understood the situation now and asked if there was anything else he should know. He concluded that Damien would soon be dead anyway, since if he really had invaded the hideout, he was digging his own grave. But at that moment, Damien was using one of his tonics to recover his energy and was advancing against the Black Snake's men. He cut them all down as if they were made of paper, severing heads and limbs easily, leaving a trail of destruction. In the city, other stronger Black Snake members began arriving to handle the situation. When Cedric went out onto the balcony to see what was happening, he and the guards were completely shocked. Damien had already eliminated all the subordinates in the courtyard. Cedric couldn't understand how it was possible, how that boy had done it all alone. He asked the guard if he was sure it was really Damien Haxon, and the guard confirmed, saying he had introduced himself. Cedric remembered hearing rumors that he was just a failed noble, never imagining he was so strong. He started wondering if the dark mage he had sent had been killed by Damien. It quickly became clear to him that the situation was out of control and that he would need help. When more Black Snake reinforcements arrived, one of the better armed subordinates pointed a magic weapon at Damien, warning that he wouldn't be able to block it. He fired a huge fireball at Damien, mocking him for trying to use a sword against magic. But Damien stood firm. He used the secret flow dispersal technique to deflect the fireball and send it back at the enemies, blowing up the three men on the rooftop. He muttered to himself that they should have been more careful. He then said he would find out who the real boss of the Black Snake was. But before he could advance, another man appeared. This one was clearly much more powerful. Damien had to dodge quickly from a punch that carried such an intense aura it made the hairs on his neck stand up. The knight approached, saying he was curious to see who had caused so much chaos, but that in the end he was just a rookie. Damien immediately realized he was an official knight. Now he was surrounded not only by the Black Snake's men, but also by the city's own guards. Sebastian, the governor, appeared and furiously demanded to know how Damien dared cause such an uproar in the middle of the city, warning that he himself, as the ruler of Landwalk, would punish him for it. Damien wanted to know what crime he was being accused of. Sebastian scolded him, saying he was trying to ruin the life of a good businessman like Cedric by attacking his business and injuring many innocent people. Some nearby people found that description odd and whispered that they didn't see Cedric as a businessman, but quickly fell silent when they realized everyone was listening. Sebastian insisted it was a serious crime that couldn't be forgiven. Cedric, meanwhile, thought it didn't matter how hard Damien tried, because he would never beat someone protected by the city's governor. Meanwhile, Damien reflected that he had finally found the leader of the organization called the Black Snake. He knew the group had ties to local rulers, but was surprised to see how devoted Sebastian seemed to the scheme, like a true follower of the Black Snake cult. To him, it was ironic that they called someone like Cedric a respectable businessman, thinking the governor had terrible judgment. Sebastian became very irritated and ordered Damien to be quiet, saying he needed to apologize to Cedric if he wanted any chance of having his sentence reduced. But Damien refused because he believed he hadn't done anything wrong. Sebastian then said he was going easy on him because because he was young, but couldn't prevent what would happen next. He asked Sir Robert to take control of the situation. Robert introduced himself as the city's guardian knight and ordered Damien to drop his sword and surrender immediately. Damien hadn't expected to see the guardian knight there. Robert noticed a hint of fear in his eyes and questioned whether he was brave or just foolish. Damien understood that Robert was very confident, because he truly was strong. Even so, he tried to resist and managed to dodge the first strike. However, he knew Robert was much stronger than him at the moment, and only needed to buy time until reinforcements arrived. When Robert landed the next punch, even blocking with his arms, Damien was sent flying. The knight's aura burned his skin, causing damage despite his defense. Robert kept pressing with his halberd, attacking so quickly that Damien could barely react. Suddenly, someone appeared and blocked the strike, disarming Robert. This left Cedric and Sebastian terrified. They demanded the stranger identify themselves. When the hood fell back, everyone was shocked to see it was a white-haired woman. She was a holy knight. Her arrival was a relief for Damien, who even thought about how long she had taken. Victor, his ally, finally appeared with more reinforcements. Cedric wondered why there was a paladin there, and whether it was connected to a deal he had made with a dark mage. Victor ran over to help Damien, asking if he was okay. Damien said he was, though he had nearly died waiting. He thanked Victor for doing his part. Victor said he wasn't good at much, but he could always be trusted to run fast. The story then shifted back a few hours to explain how the plan had formed. In a church, Victor showed up unexpectedly while everyone was praying at the altar. The nun was surprised by the sudden arrival and confirmed that the place was a branch of the Divine Order. Victor explained he needed to deliver two important things on behalf of his young master and asked them to act as quickly as possible. He had proof that someone was conspiring with a dark mage. The nun wanted to see the notes. Just by touching the notebook, she felt the dark magic in it and recognized a cursed symbol. Inside the bag, when she opened it, there was a head, confirming who the criminal was. That man was an executive under Yulan Agito, a dangerous name. The nun then removed her habit and revealed herself to be a paladin. She wanted to know where the person who gave her the evidence was. Soon after, standing before Damien, she was more reserved and even a bit shy while speaking to him. She thanked him deeply, saying the evidence was excellent, and that the Divine Order would handle the situation from there. Damien replied that they were free to act however they wished, since he couldn't interfere in the Order's affairs. He felt satisfied seeing everything unfold as he had planned. The Divine Order was known for being benevolent and helping the poor, serving God with mercy. However, when it came to heretics and dark mages, they were ruthless and killed without hesitation, being seen as fanatics by many. Their elite force were the paladins, and now he had a paladin there to help him. She turned to the gathered crowd and declared loudly that the Divine Order had received a report that someone in Landwalk was conspiring with a dark mage. The citizens were surprised, but many deep down already suspected the Black Snake was involved. The paladin said they had already identified those responsible. She declared that the city's governor would be taken by the Divine Order to face trial. Sebastian protested, saying Landwalk was an autonomous city recognized by the crown, and they couldn't just act like that. The paladin firmly explained that the governor would be judged for his vile and heretical behavior against God's will. The Divine Order placed itself above the crown in such cases. Even more importantly, she revealed that both the governor and the guardian knight were considered the main suspects. Sebastian couldn't understand what the paladin was talking about. He denied having hired any dark mage, but the paladin was direct, saying Cedric was the main person responsible for funding and reinforcing the activities of dark mages in the city. To her, there was no doubt about his guilt. Sebastian was shocked and turned to Cedric, wanting to know if it was true. Cedric, trying to keep his composure, insisted it was nonsense and that she had to be crazy to say such a thing. The paladin then decided to present the proof. She showed a notebook containing Cedric Walk's name. Inside was a list of items requested by a dark mage in exchange for services, all written in Cedric's own handwriting. He was in shock, unable to understand why the dark mage would write something like that. He tried to explain it away as a misunderstanding, denying any involvement with dark magic, but the paladin said it would be thoroughly investigated and ordered that he be arrested immediately. Thus, Cedric, Sebastian, and Robert were taken away by members of the Divine Order. Damien simply watched with a big smile on his face. For Sebastian, it was hard to believe that boy had planned it all from the start. It was humiliating to think that he, the governor, was being dragged away like a criminal by those fanatics. Cedric, desperate, asked Robert if he was really going to surrender so easily, accusing the Divine Order of committing a crime in his city. Seeing his weapon in the guard's hands, Robert decided to react. panicked. He said that if he was going to be taken, he'd at least take someone with him. Then he charged furiously to attack the paladin. Cedric even smiled, thinking they might get rid of her. But Damien realized it was a huge mistake. The paladin dodged the strike as if it were nothing. With a single punch to Robert's chest, she completely destroyed his armor and pierced through his chest, killing him instantly. She coldly declared that those who dared interfere with God's designs deserved nothing but death. To her, Robert had been judged and condemned by divine power. Cedric, seeing this, lost all hope. He surrendered completely, accepting his fate. Sebastian, furious, called everyone insolent. Victor, meanwhile, looked at Cedric with disdain, questioning whether that pathetic man was really the head of the Black Cobra. Damien, smiling, confirmed that it was indeed him. Victor mocked him, saying he did not look tough at all now. Cedric, humiliated, thought he had been defeated by someone so insignificant. Damien reflected that everything had ended well thanks to Victor and the Divine Order. He also realized that the Paladin was much more powerful than he had imagined. Given the divine power she displayed, he suspected she was a disciple of the Flame of Azuri. At that moment, it was explained who the members of the Brigade of the Flame of Azuri were. It was one of the 5 great holy orders and considered the most powerful of them all. They were famous for being ruthless with heretics and for having killed more enemies than any other holy order. The Paladin then approached Damien to thank him for his help. Damien responded humbly that he had only done what was necessary. She explained that because of his help, she would overlook the countless sins he had committed. Damien accepted, acknowledging it. However, the Paladin was direct in asking if he had not called the Divine Order merely to cover up the fact that he had attacked the Black Cobra for his own interests. Damien realized she had easily seen through his true intentions. He lowered his head and apologized, admitting he also had personal motives. He explained that the Black Mage not only threatened the city, but also his own family. That was why he had been so merciless in retaliating. The Paladin listened, and considering the circumstances, decided to forgive him this time. Damien felt relieved to see that she was more flexible than he expected. She also explained that the reward for the Black Mage's head would be paid soon. Damien, curious, wanted to know the amount. When she said the reward was 1,000 gold coins, Victor almost lost his breath in shock. But Damien thought for a moment and replied that he preferred something else instead of the money. Victor did not understand how anyone could refuse 1,000 gold coins and was in shock. The Paladin wanted to know what he desired that could be so valuable. Damien explained that he wanted to receive one of the mana cultivation methods that the Divine Order possessed. The Paladin was surprised to see that even someone strong enough to defeat the Black Cobra still wanted a cultivation method. Damien confirmed it. He told himself that when he fought the Black Mage, he realized he was still not strong enough. He had only won because he was lucky and had an authority within his body. In the future, he would face much more dangerous enemies. He knew he would need to reach another level. For that, he wanted to have a proper mana cultivation method, just as he had learned in his past life, in the days when he lived as a mercenary. Damien explained to the Paladin that he did not want just any basic method, but a high-level one. The Paladin was surprised and asked if he had reached that level only with a basic method. She could sense a great aura emanating from his body and realized that the boy's talent was frightening. She also noticed he was capable of killing heretics without showing any mercy. Instead of offering only a cultivation method, the Paladin remarked that there was a much better way. She asked if he would be interested in joining the order, offering him the position of Divine Knight, a Paladin. Damien, however, refused without showing any interest. The Paladin fell to the ground, overcome with sadness, not understanding how he could refuse something so grand. She explained that being a Paladin was to receive God's grace and hold an extremely difficult position to attain. Damien even felt a bit bad, but knew he had no faith at all and did not want to become a blind servant of the church. He could not say that openly, so he chose to give an excuse. He said he did not yet deserve God's love and intended to follow his path to try to redeem himself. Victor, who was watching everything, immediately suspected Damien was lying again. But the Paladin was moved by those words, saying they sounded beautiful and opened her ears to the truth. She then promised to provide the mana cultivation method he asked for, but warned him that if he changed his mind, the doors of the order would always be open to him. Damien sincerely thanked her, though in his mind, he thought he would never accept it. Even so, he acknowledged the value of the gift. The Paladin apologized for not introducing herself earlier. Her name was Agnes, disciple of the Azuri Flame. Damien replied that it was an honor to meet her and asked permission to take care of some business before leaving. Agnes agreed, but wanted to know what business those were. Damien then approached Cedric and kicked him hard in the stomach, making him vomit what little he had in his belly. He commented to himself that it felt really good to kick him since his fat belly was so soft. Next, he kicked him in the face and continued beating him for quite a while. The Paladin and Victor just watched without interfering. When he finished, Damien remarked that he felt much better. Victor then asked if it was finally over, and Damien replied that it probably was. Meanwhile, at the Lionbloom residence, Marquis Roland Lionbloom was looking for his son. Erwin was curled up under the covers, trembling, and confirmed it was his father who was there. Roland asked what the meaning of that situation was. Erwin, terrified, said that someone had tried to kill him. He explained, confused, that it was not exactly a knife, but a fork that had been pointed at his neck, and even so, he had felt very scared. Roland was surprised by his son's terror and demanded an explanation from the guard about who had done that. The guard informed him that the person responsible was Damien Haxon from the Vice County. Roland became furious, knocking everything over around him while yelling that Amir Henuso had dared to attack his son. He ordered men to be gathered to send to the Vice County of Hena, declaring that he wanted that boy dead. Later, at the Haxon estate, Agnes, the paladin of the Divine Order, arrived accompanied. Paul and Marilda received them, visibly nervous at the presence of someone so important. Paul quickly imagined that their son had caused such trouble that even the Divine Order had come because of it. Paul mentioned he had heard from his son that they would be staying in the territory for a while, and Agnes confirmed it, saying it was a decision to investigate heretics in the region. Paul then warned that the house was small but offered some rooms. In response, Agnes handed over a lot of gold as a demonstration of gratitude and sincerity. Easily convinced by the money, Paul said the house was theirs and they could stay as long as they wanted. Agnes thanked them greatly for their hospitality and also for Damien's contribution to the investigation by the Divine Order. Damien had not planned for that, but he accepted it. Agnes said she was there to investigate but wanted to mention something else. She became gentler with a smile on her face, while Damien's parents looked at him with signs of approval. Marilda even got excited, telling herself that her son was quite the charmer. Damien just thought it was nothing like that. Agnes explained that she was also there to deliver the mana cultivation method he had asked for. She said she had personally selected 2 volumes for him. One of the books was a sword technique because, according to her, if she gave him only one training method, he would not be able to make full use of its power. Damien thought he already had enough sword techniques, but decided the more the better. He accepted the 2 gifts, the power accumulation cultivation art, something he had never seen in his past life, and the sword technique. He committed himself to training in both. Agnes, a bit embarrassed, admitted it had been very difficult to bring those materials, especially because she did not hold such a powerful position within the order. Damien recognized that she must have gone through a lot to obtain them. Agnes confirmed that she had needed her master's authority to do it, and said Damien was someone extremely important to the Divine Order. Agnes insisted once more, asking if Damien could at least consider becoming a paladin. Damien apologized, saying he could not. Agnes understood and remarked that insisting again would be rude. Even so, she made it clear that if he changed his mind, the doors of the order would be open to him. Damien thought that, as always, these people really had an obsession. Later, the Divine Order was investigating the cave where the black mage named Ajido had carried out his research. One of the investigators commented that it was all very suspicious, since Ajido was a dangerous black mage, highly wanted, who had escaped several times in the past. According to investigations, he belonged to a cursed school, and despite that was not weak. In fact, he was a very powerful mage. Even so, he had been defeated by a noble from a rural area, which did not make sense. Another investigator said he had thought the same, and suggested they should raise those doubts officially. But his colleague replied that they should first finish the investigation. That was when Agnes appeared and said they could trust Damien. She said she understood everyone's suspicions, but guaranteed that he was not lying. Even so, the investigators admitted they did not know how Damien had managed to kill Ajido. Agnes explained that, according to Damien's account, he simply dodged the attack and struck the enemy's neck. One of the investigators was surprised at the simplicity of the explanation and asked if that was really all. Agnes confirmed it, saying that whether it was true or not, the fact was that Ajido was dead. She herself had doubted Damien's abilities before. That was why, before dealing with the Black Cobra gang, she had observed him in action. Alone, Damien killed dozens of Black Cobra guards without receiving a single scratch. The most impressive thing was the techniques he used, including one that allowed him to return a fireball to the attacker. The investigators were shocked, asking if that was really possible. Agnes explained she had heard of swordmasters capable of doing something similar. One of the investigators commented that if it was true, Damien was very powerful. Agnes said she was not claiming he was a swordmaster, but that he was clearly someone extremely skilled. She said that although her main mission was to investigate Yoran, she now also wanted to introduce Damien to her master, because he could be a great help to the Divine Order. For now, she asked everyone to set aside those suspicions and focus on the investigation. The investigators agreed. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, a Lion Bloom delegation was approaching the Haxan territory. The first knight, Alphys, commented that they had finally arrived. The second, Lavender, complained about the strong smell. Alphys replied that he was not used to the countryside and explained that it was the smell of the pasture and cow dung. The commander, the official knight Gerik from the Hon Gerondado, ordered them to be quiet. He himself could not understand why the Marquis had sent them to such a remote place. Alphys explained that the mission was to arrest Damien Haxan and take him back to their territory. Gerik sarcastically said that bringing that trash back would be a very easy task. At that moment, an old man passed by them, leaning on a cane. He walked slowly until Gerik called him, asking if he lived in the Haxan Viscounty. The old man replied yes and wanted to know why they were asking. Without any warning, Gerik killed him, cutting off his head. Then he said it was absurd for a commoner not to bow to a Lion Bloom knight. Gerik then commented to Lavender and Alphys that he had an even better idea. As soon as they reached the Viscounty, they would not just kill Damien, but everyone else too. When they entered the territory, the first to spot them was Victor. Meanwhile, near the same cave, the Divine Order was finishing its investigation. One of the investigators lamented that they had not found much information, but Agnes reassured them, saying everyone had worked hard. Suddenly, they all felt a powerful energy coming from Damien, who was cultivating his mana with the new method he had received. The investigators were impressed, commenting that it was truly remarkable. Agnes was speechless when she realized that the energy convergence technique she had given Damien was already nearly at its final stage in such a short time. It was a cultivation method that absorbed all the mana from the surroundings. She wondered how he had managed to master it so quickly. When Damien finished, he took a deep breath and noticed everyone watching him with admiration. He asked if the investigation had already been concluded, and Agnes said yes, praising his progress. Damien confirmed there had been a slight improvement and thought to himself that Agnes had not lied when she said it was difficult to obtain that method. Even he, who had been a high-level swordsman in his past life, had found it challenging to master that technique. Even so, it was a very useful cultivation method. The force convergence technique had been created to compensate for the weakness of the Peryuk sword style, which consumed a lot of mana. Thanks to it, the speed of mana accumulation increased greatly, and even allowed the temporary storage of external mana. Agnes remained impressed with him. Damien then remarked that it was already time for dinner, and suggested that everyone head back home. Suddenly, Damien felt a strong killing intent in the air. He thought those worms had finally arrived. He warned Agnes that something urgent had come up, and that he needed to leave immediately. He told her to feel free to return whenever she needed. Then he ran off at extremely high speed, leaving Agnes even more impressed. One of the investigators commented on how fast he was, and Agnes reflected that he could move so quickly while using so little mana, showing extremely precise control. She wondered what the limit of that man was. At that moment, the Lion Bloom Knights were beating Victor, demanding he reveal where his master was. As they kicked the fallen young man, they told him he was underestimating the Lion Bloom family. Even injured, Victor replied that he was only protecting his young master. That was when Paul appeared, ordering them to stop the violence. The knights recognized that he must be the Viscount of the Haxan lands. Paul knelt beside Victor to check if he was all right, and indignantly asked what the meaning of that was, complaining that men calling themselves knights were beating up a civilian. Gerik, the commander of the knights, answered coldly. He said that considering what the Viscount of Haxan had done to the house of Marquis Lionbloom, this was nothing. He explained that the Marquis wanted Damien Haxan, and ordered that they hand him over obediently. Paul understood it was retaliation for everything that had happened, acknowledging in his thoughts that the Marquis had chosen a barbaric way to avenge his son. Gerik, meanwhile, was lying to himself, as he actually planned to burn the whole place down as soon as he captured Damien. Paul, however, declared that he would not hand over his son. Gerik asked if he was sure about that, warning him that he would regret it. When Paul did not back down, Gerik did not hesitate and ordered his knights to destroy everything they saw. At that moment, a cold voice interrupted everything, asking if the insects had lost their minds completely. It was Damien, who arrived exuding such a powerful killing intent that even Gerik felt fear. The knights around them froze from the pressure. Damien walked over to Victor, noticing the terrible state he was in. He asked if he was all right. He observed how badly Victor had been beaten, and thought that if it were not for his tough body, he would have died from those attacks. He reflected that if Victor had died there, he himself would have already killed all those knights. Gerik then confirmed that this must be the famous Damien. He said he had heard about him, about how he supposedly challenged the young master of the Lion Bloom house, but in the end, he was nothing more than an arrogant fool who thought he was powerful just because he had defeated Erwin. He then ordered his knights to attack. Damien, however, was no longer willing to hold back. He thought it was the perfect moment to test his new technique. When the first knight advanced, Damien grabbed his arm and twisted it so easily that it seemed like he used no effort at all. He thought he could use all the mana he had just accumulated to test his next strike. With a simple punch, he pierced the knight's armor and sent him flying. Another did not even have time to to react before taking a direct kick to the mouth, losing a tooth. Damien felt ready to use his heart as a mana core, further enhancing the power of his attacks. Garrick, seeing his men fall so quickly, was shocked. Meanwhile, Victor, even unconscious, slowly raised his arm and gave Damien a thumbs up, showing he was still alive. Damien then took a deep breath and felt a momentary relief, knowing he would protect everyone there. Garrick calmly dismounted his horse and wondered to himself if young Master Erwin had really fallen for such a cheap trick. The more he thought about it, the less he understood how a rural noble, a simple bumpkin, could have so much skill. Meanwhile, Damien stood firm, saying it was none of Garrick's business. Garrick started to reflect and said he now understood everything. He accused Damien of not being the real Damien Haxon, leaving everyone around them surprised. Even Paul and Victor, despite being injured, were shocked by the accusation. Damien reacted without understanding what he was talking about, but Garrick insisted he was just pretending. According to him, it had all been a trap from the start because Damien wasn't who he claimed to be. For Garrick, he was just a paid fraud meant to tarnish the Lion Bloom name, calling Damien an insignificant villain who dared to target the Marquisate. Damien just found the opponent unbearable and idiotic. Meanwhile, the Lion Bloom Knights were on the ground, unable to get up. Victor was silently hoping his young master would win, while Paul was clearly worried about the situation. Garrick prepared to draw his sword, thinking Damien was skilled, but that his luck would run out there. He knew that as soon as Damien was in range, it would only take a blink to decapitate him. When he finally drew the sword and tried to cut his opponent's neck, Damien blocked firmly. He asked if all Lion Bloom Knights were that predictable, while Garrick realized something was wrong since Damien had blocked the strike so easily. Garrick insisted Damien had only been lucky and wouldn't be able to block the famous lion's roar. But Damien did, saying the attack was too slow. In the next moment, it was his turn to counterattack. Damien struck Garrick's face and other parts of his body almost simultaneously, so fast the movements were barely visible. He then delivered such a strong kick to Garrick's face that it sent him rolling, even with all his heavy armor. To him, that kick was for Victor. Consumed by rage, Garrick lost all tactics and charged blindly, using all his power without thinking. He resorted to his most powerful technique, the majestic lion sword, but Damien wasn't intimidated. He thought the technique was flashy but useless. With precision, he pressed the tip of his blade against his opponent's, completely disintegrating Garrick's weapon. He then pierced his shoulder, cutting off his right arm. Garrick could only scream before falling to the ground, defeated. Even injured, Garrick tried to use his aura to stop the bleeding, but ended up at Damien's mercy. Admitting defeat, Garrick begged for forgiveness and pleaded for his life. At that moment, Damien calmly declared who he really was. Damien Haxon, heir of the Haxon territory. He asked why Garrick, who was now begging for his life, hadn't done that before. He reminded him that he had been violent with his family and that he had no intention of forgiving him so easily. Garrick seemed confused, not even sure who or what he was apologizing for. Then Victor and Paul approached, ready to beat him even more. After the beating, the three men fell silent. Victor asked if that was enough or if they wanted to keep hitting him, to which Damien replied that if they went too far, they might end up killing him. He joked that they could always cut off a few more limbs. Victor thought it was a good idea, but Paul said it was enough. At that point, Garrick finally admitted his mistake. He apologized to Lord Paul, acknowledging that he had disrespected him and the territory of Haxon. Paul, however, asked if a simple apology would really be enough, reminding him that if Damien hadn't been so strong, their territory would have been destroyed and he himself would have been tortured by Marquis Lion Bloom. Faced with that, Garrick hit his head on the ground, begging for forgiveness and mercy. Paul then turned to his son, leaving the final decision to Damien. Damien reflected that he had never intended to kill Garrick, or he would have done it already. He knew he could deal with House Lion Bloom himself, but for the sake of his family, he had to act carefully. He also realized that if he just sent Garrick back in that condition without an agreement, they would certainly come back with even more force. At that moment, Agnes appeared, asking what had happened. Damien saw an opportunity and concluded that this woman could be very useful once again. After explaining everything to her, Agnes said she could help him with that dilemma. Thanks to the Haxon family, they had found the key to locating the Black Mages of Huron, so they decided to form an alliance between House Haxon and the Divine Order. Paul reflected that this was actually excellent, since with that alliance, they could avoid many problems in the future. Damien apologized for being so shameless, but took the opportunity to ask for a favor. He realized that that was exactly what he wanted, the protection of the church. Agnes replied that it wouldn't be a problem. Then Damien gave instructions for everyone to listen carefully. He ordered Garrick to return to Marquis Lionbloom and tell him that from that moment on, the Haxon family was under the church's protection. If they tried to use force again, they would have to face divine wrath. Once they understood the message, Garrick and his men fled, even though they were wounded and missing arms or legs in fighting condition. Victor commented that they could finally relax a bit, but Paul reminded them they still needed to decide what to do next. He planned to call a family meeting. When everyone was gathered, including Agnes, Paul explained that the current problem was House Lionbloom, which would probably cause more trouble. They needed to think about how to deal with it and the fief. Abel asked if, having received the church's protection, they couldn't just forget about the feud problem. But Louise argued they couldn't rely on the church for everything. Paul agreed, explaining that the church didn't get involved in direct noble disputes. Besides, the Marquise's family didn't just have military power, but also controlled trade routes, allowing them to crush any noble family if they wanted. For him, it was clear they needed a second option, a plan B. Agnes then suggested there was more than one solution, and explained that Damien could become a paladin. But Damien immediately rejected the idea, feeling uncomfortable just hearing it again. Paul accepted the refusal and said that option was off the table. However, Abel got angry and stood up furiously, asking why their father accepted it so easily. He yelled that if his brother became a paladin, everything would be solved. For Damien, it was easy to say, but very hard to do. Abel accused Damien of having caused all those problems in the territory and said he needed to take responsibility. But Paul, using his intimidating aura, ordered Abel to sit down immediately, saying he was causing a scene in front of their guest. Reluctantly, Abel obeyed and fell silent. Paul admitted that Abel was partly right. It was Damien who had provoked the conflict with the Marquise's family. However, he wasn't the only one to blame. The Marquise's second son had his eye on Louise and wouldn't have left her alone even without any provocation. Paul declared he would do anything to protect his daughter, but unfortunately, he didn't have enough power at that moment. That was why he acknowledged Damien had to act. He stood up and said his son had done very well in the past few days, fighting for the family's honor. Damien was surprised to hear that from his father. He replied that he had only done what was right. Paul then promised to take care of everything from that point on, so Damien wouldn't have to worry anymore. At that moment, the family's butler came in hurriedly with a message. He announced that someone from the Gold Pixie family was at the door. Paul asked the reason for the visit, and the butler explained that young Master Damien had borrowed money from them, and the repayment deadline had passed. Damien remembered, embarrassed, that he had completely forgotten about it. Paul was furious with his son and told him he would have to deal with that mess himself. Later, Damien met with the collector, Orlin, the East Branch manager of Dash and Cash. Orlin commented that it had been a while since he'd seen the young master and said he was there to collect payment. Damien remembered how he'd been tricked by that man in the past, lured by promises of easy money and simple contracts. He then asked exactly how much he owed. Orlin explained that Damien had borrowed 200 gold coins, but with interest, the debt had risen to 300 coins. Damien was shocked, barely remembering taking the money at all. He knew that if they paid that, they would be completely ruined. The family would end up with nothing, turning into beggars. Orlan made it clear that if payment wasn't made that day, the land Damien had purchased with the loan would be seized by Dash and Cash. When Damien asked if that was just a formality, Orlan replied there was nothing he could do. Duke Goldpixie had given direct orders to collect all debts, regardless of whether the debtor was noble or commoner. Realizing Damien wouldn't be able to pay, Orlan warned that he would still have to collect the money. The guards with him were already ready to attack if necessary. Damien knew that would happen if he didn't pay. Orlan, for his part, enjoyed watching arrogant nobles humiliated and couldn't wait to see how Damien Haxon would react. Meanwhile, the rest of the family was at home, impatient and worried about how that problem would end. Marilda asked Paul to relax a little, saying that if he kept pacing like that, he would end up wearing a hole in the floor. Louise also tried to calm Abel down, but Paul replied he simply couldn't sit still because he felt the family was heading for ruin. Abel shouted that their destiny was to end up on the street, asking how anyone could stay calm about that. Marilda reminded them that Damien had said he would take care of everything and suggested they trust him. Louise commented that Damien had been redeeming himself lately. Paul agreed, but explained that while Damien was good with a sword, negotiation and combat were very different things. Meanwhile, Damien was handling the situation another way. He used violence to deal with the collectors. First, he slammed one of the guards' heads into the ground. Ironically, ironically saying his hand had slipped and that his father would surely scold him for it. When the second guard lunged at him, Damien twisted his arm with a technique and grabbed him by the neck, justifying that they had drawn swords against a noble, so it was self-defense. Orlan was terrified when he saw the last guard fall unconscious. Damien noticed his fear and commented on the collector's trembling legs. Orlan was already completely submissive. Damien explained that he had no way to pay the money at that moment, and Orlan, desperate, said that was fine. Damien then asked if he could pay in another way. The next day, Abel said he was actually sad about what had happened. He felt bad that they had been forced to use violence to solve it, saying the whole thing was awful. He was worried because his brother would have to go on a long journey, leaving the territory vulnerable. Paul admitted he had had no choice but to accept that solution, but wasn't sure if the plan would really work. Agnes lamented that Damien would have to leave so soon. Damien then approached to thank her for all the help she had given. Agnes explained that her own investigation was also finished and they planned to leave the next day. She blessed Damien's upcoming journey and said that if he changed his mind, he could come find them. Damien thanked her but politely declined. He then asked Victor if they could leave, and Victor replied that the luggage was already loaded in the carriage. When Damien climbed in, he noticed the carriage was quite spacious. Orlan appeared, saying he hoped it was comfortable. Damien replied curtly that if Orlan kept up that submissive attitude, he might even earn a treat. Orlan, confused, asked what he meant by that. Damien simply told Victor to get the carriage moving, and so they began the long journey toward the Duchy of Gold Pixie. When they arrived, Victor was impressed by the grandeur of the place, which was to be expected of the richest duke's mansion in the kingdom. This was the Gold Pixie Duchy. Damien thanked Orlan again, saying he wouldn't forget what he had done for him. Orlan replied that he had already informed the duke about Damien's arrival, and that he was free to enter. However, Orlan thought to himself that damn Damien was so arrogant. During the entire trip, he had felt like he was being treated like a dog and wished Damien would trip and break his neck. But in the end, he just hoped it would all be over soon. Damien then asked Victor to wait because he'd be back soon. He was received directly by Duke Adam Goldpixie. The Duke asked if he was the young master of that poor Haxon family. Damien confirmed and thanked him for recognizing him, thinking to himself that all nobles acted the same way. Adam Goldpixie commented that he'd heard from Orlan that Damien was looking for him and wanted to know why. Damien explained that he had borrowed money from the Duke's company and that the due date had come much faster than he expected. He admitted he was out of money and wanted to pay in another way. Damien's proposal surprised everyone there. He offered the Duke a victory against the Lionbloom family. The Duke found the proposal amusing and said the rumors about Damien being bold seemed true. Goldpixie's cavalry commander Gal Heimerick asked if that was really what he was proposing. Damien knew exactly what they were talking about. Recently, a large gold mine had been discovered on the border between Lionbloom and Goldpixie territories, and the two houses, already longtime rivals, were preparing to fight for it in a duel tournament. To Damien, it was clear Lionbloom would win if nothing was done, allowing them to expand their power even further and reduce Goldpixie's influence. Damien explained that if he helped the Duke win, they would both benefit. He wouldn't just pay the debt, but also break Lionbloom's dominance. Adam Goldpixie asked if it was true that he had defeated the Marquis' second son and crushed their commander. Damien confirmed, saying it was all true. The Duke became even more interested in the proposal, since he was struggling to find a good knight to represent him in the duels. Damien concluded by saying he was the perfect candidate because there was no other low-ranking knight who could challenge the Lionblooms like he could. Adam Goldpixie looked at Damien and asked if he was really saying he could defeat Michael Lionbloom, known as the greatest genius of his great generation. Damien answered confidently that yes, he could. He admitted Michael was impressive, but believed he was even stronger. One of the knights, who had been restless, interrupted, telling Adam not to believe everything so easily. Rumors were often exaggerated. He also reminded them that House Chelsea was bringing a much better candidate. This knight's name was Ernest. He explained that the Grand Duchess Chelsea had gone on a long journey specifically to find a warrior strong enough to defeat Michael Lionbloom, and that it had already been a month since she left, so she would be returning soon. That was why he suggested the Duke reconsider Damien's proposal. Adam Goldpixie acknowledged that Ernest's arguments were valid. The other knights became smug and satisfied with that answer. Meanwhile, Damien was wondering why that annoying-looking man was ruining his plans. Adam then asked Damien what he suggested to resolve the situation. Damien realized it was a test. He decided to prove his worth through action. He declared that everyone was making a huge mistake. He said he was the key to defeating the Lionblooms, and that Duchess Chelsea didn't even come close to him in ability. Ernest was outraged, saying it was absurd to claim something like that. Damien challenged him, proposing that if Ernest could block even a single blow from him, he would acknowledge his strength. Ernest asked the Duke for permission to accept the challenge and teach that insolent boy a lesson. Adam, intrigued, authorized the duel. Later, the two were already prepared to fight. Victor worried, asked why they were dueling when they had come to persuade the Duke. Damien replied that this was his way of convincing people. Victor got even more nervous, thinking the young master was in real danger. The commander announced that Ernest could begin. Before attacking, Ernest told Damien that if he knelt and apologized, he would forgive him. Damien, bored, replied that he was sleepy and wanted to get it over with so he could go to bed. Ernest got even angrier and said Damien was begging to die. He reminded him that the bet was to block a single strike and warned Damien not to regret it later. Damien thought maybe he had provoked him too much. Ernest then gathered aura at the tip of his spear and charged like a missile. Damien expected something like that from a mid-tier knight and thought blocking wouldn't be hard. However, Ernest's spear changed trajectory at the last moment and struck Damien's chest directly, drawing a lot of blood. Victor was terrified to see his friend injured, but Damien remained standing. Ernest couldn't believe he had survived that surprise attack. Even while bleeding, Damien looked at the Duke and remarked that maybe the representative spot was his now. When Victor held him to help, even more blood flowed. Adam Goldpixie was impressed to see that Damien had really withstood the blow. He admitted he had doubted before, but now saw real value in the young man. He said that Damien Haxon had proven his worth and, as promised, would be the official representative in the duels. Ernest tried to protest, but Adam interrupted him, saying that was enough and he didn't want to ruin the good mood of the moment. Ernest, not understanding, kept asking how that was possible, certain he had landed a fatal blow. Damien realized the Duke was already ignoring him. He acknowledged to himself that Ernest wasn't bad, actually above average for a mid-tier knight, but Damien was much better. To guarantee victory and convince everyone, he pretended to be of a lower level. He knew that if he hadn't used his magical shield at the last second, an advanced cultivation technique, he really would have died. Adam, noticing Damien's internal injuries, said he couldn't overlook that. He took out from a subspace ring a special gift, 5 balance pills. He explained that he had paid dearly for them at the alchemy school, since they not only healed internal wounds, but also boosted physical abilities. He mentioned that his knights used these pills during tournaments because they were excellent for recovery. Damien thanked him greatly for the gift. Adam Goldpixie replied that he hoped they would work well together from then on. Damien promised he would do his best. The next day, Damien noticed the elixir was really working. His internal injuries were almost all healed, and he already felt his body stronger. He also saw that, as expected of the Duke's household, there were excellent weapons available for training. From that day on, he decided he would use these resources to improve even more. While he was training, a short young man approached and asked who he was. This knight introduced himself as Pavel Vermont, a low-ranking knight, explaining that those with him were his companions and brothers-in-arms. They would also participate in the duels. Pavel said that the next day they would all be training out in the field and wouldn't be around, which, according to him, was lucky for Damien, because if they were there, they'd have to deal with him. Pavel said the duel against the Lee Blue was a matter of honor for the Duke's house, and he didn't want mediocre skills getting in the way. Damien, however, paid no attention to their speech. He had been curious to see what the Duke's knights were like, but then changed his mind. Watching their training, he noticed that each had a peculiar style. Pavel focused more on defensive techniques, while another young man, whose name he didn't even bother to remember, liked aerial moves. At one point, Pavel got hit in the forehead, but the group took it as a creative block and celebrated. They kept saying there was only a month left before the duel, and if they continued training like that, they'd get great results. It was obvious they had a silly kind of unity, repeating among themselves that they were one for all and all for one. But in Damien's view, they were nothing but 3 complete idiots. Victor appeared and asked if something was wrong. Damien thought he was in trouble, convinced the duel was already lost. When Victor asked why he thought that, Damien simply concluded to himself that those knights were idiots. Later, the Duke was amused by the situation, thinking it was all a big joke about the dignity of the upper class. He remarked that the commander didn't need to be so polite. It became clear what had happened the night before. The Duke had offered Damien direct training with Commander Jael Himrich, but Damien preferred to train alone. The Duke also remarked that Damien was an impressive person and asked the commander's opinion. Jael said he was a remarkable young man, able to use mana instantly to block Howard's attack, something not just anyone could do. When the Duke asked if Damien really had a chance of defeating Osai and Blum in the duel, the commander replied that it was hard to predict. With 3 duelists participating, they would need 2 victories to secure the result, so Damien's performance alone wouldn't be enough. The Duke agreed that this was true, but still trusted his knights, and asked how their training was going. Jael explained that Vincenzo was taking care of the group, and so there wasn't much to worry about. Damien, on the other hand, saw things much more grimly. He admitted to himself that the situation was even worse than he imagined. They weren't just mentally limited, but also had little stamina, no style, and no determination. With that level of skill, they would be easily massacred in the duel. With no other choice, Damien decided to act. He called the 3 knights over and ordered them to put sandbags on their arms and legs. Then he challenged them to a training fight. Pavel, thinking it was a normal match, got excited to face him alone, but Damien corrected him, making it clear he wanted all 3 at once. That deeply irritated them, and they took it as arrogance. They dropped their swords and decided to attack him with only their fists. Damien, however, wasn't worried at all. In a matter of seconds, Pavel woke up confused, trying to understand what had happened, while the other 2 were still unconscious. To him, it was clear that the 3 were pathetic. Victor, worried, asked the young master not to create scenes like that again. Meanwhile, Pavel began to remember the previous minutes. 5 minutes earlier, the 3 of them had attacked Damien at the same time. He had easily dodged the first punch and, with simple moves, knocked out 2 of them instantly. Pavel, who was the last to attack, had charged at him in fury, but a single punch was enough to leave him completely paralyzed and unconscious for 5 minutes. He kept thinking about how Damien had defeated all 3 of them effortlessly, without even breaking a sweat. When asked, Pavel admitted that the one training them was a mid-level knight named Vincenzo. Damien found it outrageous that someone with that level of skill was training them so poorly. Even so, he held back from causing more trouble, choosing not to tell them to quit training right there. Damien decided that until the day of the duel against the Lion Bloom, he would make those 3 knights spar with him every day. Pavel got worried, saying that if Vincenzo found out they were training with someone else, they'd all be punished. Damien, however, explained there was no need to worry, because even after being beaten to unconsciousness, they wouldn't have any visible marks. They realized this themselves, noticing they didn't even have a scratch on their faces. He explained that he had learned a very specific technique for beating people without leaving marks. He told them that a long time ago, there was a man who traveled all over the continent to reform criminals, known as the character corrector. His method was simple. First, he beat the prisoner for an hour. If that didn't work, he doubled the time. It was said he once spent 512 hours straight beating someone. Over time, the character corrector began to pity the criminals when he saw them covered in blood. He would even cry while beating them because he didn't want to hurt them that way. To solve this, he developed a technique called Anza, which allowed him to inflict pain without leaving external wounds. That was the technique Damien was now using on the knights. He knew they were pathetic, but told them not to worry since they still had a month before the duel tournament. During that time, he would make sure they became at least something useful, like fertilizer for the fields. He ordered them to get back to training and said they would talk more about it later. Meanwhile, a messenger arrived looking for Damien. He said the Duke wanted to see him because the Grand Duchess Chelsea had returned from her long journey. Chelsea Goldpixie explained it had been a long time since she had seen her father. Seeing her arrive safely, Ernest felt relieved. The Duke mentioned it had been exactly a month since she left on that trip and asked if she had managed to bring back the knight who would take part in the duel. Chelsea confirmed, saying the man was right behind her. He introduced himself as Guillaume Blackwind, known by the title The Wild Beast. Many recognized the name, saying he was a famous free knight who had fought in a war in the kingdom of Alana, defeating all the low-ranking knights there by himself. The Duke was impressed since he had heard a lot about him, saying Guillaume was a real beast on the battlefield. He seemed excited to see what the man was capable of. Guillaume remarked that his fame seemed to have reached the Apple Kingdom. Chelsea explained he had sworn loyalty to the Duke and agreed to participate in the upcoming duel. Many thought he would be more than enough to face Michael Lionbloom, and the Duke considered it good news, even admitting it might be a bit complicated. He explained that he still needed to introduce the other knight he had chosen for the duel, the representative who was there to defeat Michael Lionbloom, Damien Haxon. Chelsea did not like that at all. She asked her father why he had chosen another representative when she had asked him to wait for her. The Duke replied that he had never promised to wait. Chelsea insisted he could still change the representative. The Duke said he would think about it. For Chelsea, the choice was obvious since she had never even heard of this Damien. He watched that exchange and thought to himself that she really was a spoiled girl, exactly as he had expected. Chelsea said it was only natural to prefer someone like Guillaume over some complete nobody. The Duke disagreed. Even recognizing Guillaume's reputation, he said Damien had proven himself strong enough to block an attack from Ernest. Chelsea dismissed that as just an excuse to avoid acknowledging her abilities, saying her father always did that to her and her mother. The Duke scolded her to watch her tongue in front of guests. She ended up apologizing, saying the fatigue from the trip was messing with her head. Damien realized that family had plenty of problems and decided he did not want to get involved in any of it. The Duke said he would choose the representative for the duel after consulting his officers and ordered them to end the discussion and leave the office. At that moment, Guillaume let out a loud laugh. He found it funny that this conversation was even happening. The commander remarked that he was being very rude. Guillaume replied replied that in the end, the strongest should be the representative. He then challenged Damien. Whoever won would get the spot. Chelsea tried to stop him, asking Guillaume to be quiet, but the Duke admitted that technically he wasn't wrong. He then asked Damien what he thought about it. Damien reflected that sooner or later he would have to settle this and show off some of his skills. He acknowledged that Guillaume was right, since the strongest really should be the representative, but he thought there was a way to settle it without actually fighting. He then proposed a strength contest. Guillaume accepted the challenge, warning Damien not to blame him if his arm got ripped off. Damien simply thought he was really rough and got ready. When the strength contest began, Guillaume used all his might, but in the next instant he was lying on the ground. Damien had thrown him down with extreme ease, proving once and for all who was stronger. Chelsea was confused seeing Guillaume on the floor and wondered what had happened. The commander found it impressive. He noticed Guillaume had grabbed Damien's hand first, yet Damien still managed to turn all the force against him. It wasn't just raw strength, there was technique involved. Guillaume, furious at having been humiliated like that, got even angrier realizing Damien hadn't even seemed to try. Even so, Damien admitted that Guillaume had held up well. He had tried to dislocate his shoulder, but failed. That was when Guillaume took it as a death sentence, and, consumed by rage, drew 2 large axes. Even with Chelsea trying unsuccessfully to calm him down, he charged in, promising to tear Damien apart. At that moment, an overwhelming pressure filled the room, stopping Guillaume in his tracks. It was Commander Jail's aura, who was visibly angry that he had drawn weapons in front of the Duke. Firmly, he made it clear he would not tolerate that, and asked if Guillaume had any last words. Damien watched, impressed. He recognized that this aura was not normal, and realized this was a true high-class knight. Jail explained that out of respect for Chelsea, he would let it go this time, but there would be no second chance. Guillaume, finally released from that pressure, relented, and the Duke remarked that the situation had gotten out of hand, far too dramatic for a simple meeting. Even so, after considering everything he had seen, the Duke decided to keep Damien as the representative for the duels. Ernest, however, disagreed. He said it had not been a fair match. Guillaume was not fully recovered from the journey, and Damien had an advantage because they were only using their hands. To him, it made no sense to ignore that Guillaume was a knight who fought with weapons. Chelsea supported Ernest, saying the best way to resolve it would be with an official duel. The Duke asked her to be more reasonable, but she firmly argued back, being harshly scolded by him. He accused his daughter of acting with her usual incompetence, which made her admit she had gone too far. Even so, Ernest remained very angry. Damien then spoke up. He told the Duke he would accept Miss Chelsea's proposal. The Duke, surprised, did not object, and ended up calmly accepting the decision. Later, Damien was walking through the streets, accompanied by Victor. Victor wanted to know why he had agreed to the official duel, since there was no need to take such a risk. Damien was so irritated by the questions that he said he had a headache just from hearing him. Soon, they found the forge the Duke had recommended when he agreed that Damien could participate in the official duel. At the time, the Duke had said he would not stop him, but Damien needed a new sword because the previous one had been damaged in the duel against Howard's. As soon as they arrived at the forge, Victor introduced himself on behalf of Duke Goldpixie to pick up the young master's new sword. The blacksmith confirmed he had already been notified and invited them inside. The arsenal impressed Damien and Victor, who commented that the weapons were incredible. Damien agreed, observing everything carefully until he saw a specific sword in the display. The blacksmith explained that it was a unique piece. It had been commissioned by a knight who worked for the Duke's family, but had to leave before receiving the weapon. Damien suspected that the man had used resonant steel in the design, and the blacksmith, surprised by his knowledge, confirmed it. Damien thought the shape of that sword reminded him of his favorite weapon, a model used by a swordmaster known as the Maestro. Determined, he said he would take that one. The blacksmith warned about the characteristics of resonant steel. Unlike rare metals that amplified mana, it had a unique trait that repelled it, creating resonance waves. When he asked the name of the weapon, the blacksmith explained that the former owner had called it the Thousand Leagues Sword. Damien accepted it, and with the new weapon in hand, he returned to the Duke's mansion. As soon as he arrived, he was approached by a maid named Rebecca, who served Lady Chelsea. She asked if he had found a good weapon, and explained that Chelsea would like to speak with him if he was not busy. Damien found it hard to believe there was anything useful to discuss with her, but Rebecca insisted that the lady always had something up her sleeve and might be able to offer something interesting. Damien realized she was trying to persuade him but decided to play along. He agreed and asked Rebecca to go ahead of him. Later, Damien went to a restaurant reserved exclusively for nobles, personally managed by Chelsea Goldpixie. For this meeting, she had the entire place cleaned and left completely empty just to receive him. Rebecca escorted him to the door and said that Chelsea was waiting inside. As soon as he entered, Damien noticed a strange scent in the air. Chelsea greeted him with wine and commented about him being late, inviting him to sit. From the start, Damien knew she was plotting something. He noticed the staging, the exaggerated formality, and the attempt to appear friendly. She tried to guide the situation conversation calmly, suggesting they talk more after the meal. But Damien had no patience for that. He got straight to the point and demanded that she say what she wanted right away. Then Chelsea revealed her objective. She wanted Damien to give up his position as representative. Damien asked if she did not trust that Guillaume could defeat him in a duel. Chelsea explained that was not the reason. She was sure Guillaume would easily win as soon as he took up his axe, but she wanted to save his strength for the official duel that would happen in a month. For her, it would be terrible if someone got hurt before the time. Damien acknowledged that this made sense, but asked what advantage he would have in accepting her request. Chelsea was clear that she could give him anything. As a noble, she had access to money, fame, and practically anything he might desire. For her, it was natural that he would be tempted by that. He, however, saw it as pure arrogance. Chelsea insisted that it would be good for him to have a good relationship with the future Duchess. In the middle of the conversation, Damien noticed an hourglass on the table. When the sand ran out, the scent in the air became noticeably stronger. It was a powerful smell, heavy with magic. That scent had a name, Alluri, a form of dark magic used to create attraction, forced affection, and mental manipulation. Normally, in this concentration, it would turn someone into a submissive slave in less than an hour. But Damien had realized everything the moment he entered. He was already very used to dark magic since his previous life, and besides that, he possessed the authority of greed, a power that allowed him to absorb that kind of magic as if it were nothing. So he simply ignored the effect. Chelsea expected him to give in, but Damien remained firm and refused. This left her completely confused. She could not understand how he was resisting it. She still tried to argue, promising him anything he wanted, but he made it clear he wanted nothing from her. He said that what he truly desired was something she could never give. She grew even more irritated and asked what could be so difficult to obtain. Damien then thought to himself that he wanted the happiness of his family, something that money or power could never buy. He stood up, determined to end the conversation, and told her to prepare Guillaume for the duel. Chelsea, annoyed, sarcastically remarked that he must really value his family. Then she threatened that if he did not step down as representative, she would send someone to destroy the house where they lived. At that moment, Damien completely lost his patience. He stepped forward and grabbed Chelsea by the neck with force. She, nearly breathless, tried to protest, demanding that he release her. He was ready to kill her if necessary. But when the guards came into the room, he quickly let her go. In one precise motion, Damien drew his dagger and cut the guards' necks. They were not fatal blows, but enough to frighten them and make them bleed a little. He ordered them to drink a potion quickly so they would not die. With that, Damien made it clear to Chelsea Goldpixie that while he was there, he would control himself out of respect for the Duke, but if she crossed the line, he would punish her without hesitation. He left a severe warning. If she dared do anything against his family, she would see all the worst horrors this world could offer. Chelsea was completely terrified. Later, Rebecca entered and asked if she was all right. Chelsea, still trembling with rage, promised herself she would kill Damien. She then called Mustang Fury for a private conversation. She asked why the dark magic spell had not worked on him. Mustang admitted he did not know for sure, suggesting that Damien might have exceptional resistance to that kind of magic. Chelsea, furious, smashed the glasses on his face, making her hatred clear. Then she asked where Guillaume was at that moment. Mustang replied that he was probably in some tavern, resting from the trip. She grew even angrier knowing he was drinking before such an important duel. Chelsea then demanded to know if he was absolutely sure that Guillaume would defeat Damien. Mustang confidently said yes. He stated that he was the pride of Uran, a rare knight gifted with high-level dark magic, and asked her to be patient, reminding her that Uran was on her side. Chelsea, still filled with rage, warned him that he had better keep that promise because if he failed, he would be the first to die. Meanwhile, Damien had listened to their entire conversation without them noticing. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or any suggestions for future videos. I really appreciate your support. See you next time. See you